Hotep, this is Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. The title of this show is Renaissance Artist. Actually, I didn't really know what title to give to this show because my guest is such a stellar individual that I really didn't know how to describe him. So I'm glad he's here because he can help me make the description real. But I'm here with Samuel Akainyah. Samuel Akainyah is many things to many people. He is an artist. I think he's probably known most for that. He is also a professor of art and art history. He is also a writer, having written a book which will be in 2 volumes when it's published, and this is not the actual size of the book. This is the galley of the book. It's called The World I Left Behind, and it deals with the first 25 years of his life. Then, of course, he's a composer as well. So writer, composer, professor, artist, and a family man, married with children. He's a Renaissance man in every sense of the word that I can think of, but I was asked by someone to ask him to give his definition of what a man is. So whenever you're ready, Samuel Akainyah, you may hold forth and give us the benefit of your thinking about what I've just said about you.
This is quite an introduction, and Gloria, as I would like to say. A definition of a man, I suppose I've grown under the shadows of many of those such individuals. We were told a few things as we came of age.
Who was telling you these few things?
These are older men in our family. So there were uncles, there were fathers, not just mine, but other members of the family, their fathers as well, and nothing was born and carried as a weight by only one man. But in our tribe, the Nzema tribe, where I hail from, when a son is born, the father gathers a meeting of every male in that bloodline older than him, including his own father and grandfather, and to beg their permission and authority to name the son that he's just had after one elder clansman in the family. So you cannot just choose a name. So for instance, the public knows me as Samuel Akainyah. Samuel is my Christian name, and Akainyah is my father's last name. But my full name is Samuel Kwame Akainyah Akainyah. Kwame means an Nzema boy born on Saturday. Probably the noted Nzema person with that name is Kwame Nkrumah. And then the second is the Akainyah, which is the ancestral name. So when I was born, my father had to swear that oath in front of all the clansmen of his male line to ask them permission to name me after his grandfather, who had the name Akainyah. And of course, you can't choose any mere minion. The person has to have some relatively strong stance about himself, principles, ethics, morality, and so on and so such. Educated or not, these men were considered the aristocrats. Some were illiterate and others were not, but they were considered traditional aristocrats because they adhered to the tenets that literally gave grounding to the tribe. So after my father requested permission from them, can I name this child after my grandfather? And the people universally say yes, because my grandfather was this nobleman who worked very hard, and he opened up the plantation that the family was able to be supported and helped other people and became part of the local chieftaincy of the region we came from. So by making that oath, then he was obliged to raise me to fulfill those heavy foot tracks of those ancestry. So I live in Chicago and I'm married. And I have a son, and so although I'm 9,000 miles across the Atlantic, I had to make that same oath. And having made the oath means I bring full measure of my emotions and energies to work, to insulate the children, my wife and family from any perils. And my wife's duty to us is to nurture, complete brick and mortar, and then to make sure that I birth a child and to name my ancestry. And if I don't birth a child, then I should participate in raising a nephew or a niece, and that becomes the totality of my manhood.
Excuse me, I think there must be dust in this air. You are from Ghana.
Correct.
And these are traditions that are not just Ghanaian traditions, but I would imagine that this is a corporal value, that it is valued by African people throughout the continent.
Yes.
That the men of the kinship group are all bear a responsibility toward the children, all of the children, not just their biological children. Is that?
You're absolutely correct. The continent is going through a tidal wave of urbanization and social change. So what used to be the solid human infrastructure and the core of the culture is somehow losing some threads. Having said that, I think, you know, if you would go from west to east, north to south, a great majority of the rural areas in particular, the essential core of this ethic still remains. And you see it everywhere. I know in Ghana in particular, where I have lived and grown, is so much. You see it in the Ashantis, you see it in the Fantis, in the Gars and so on, but there is a distinct cultural practice amongst those who adhere to this, these traditions, and it has survived thousands of years. And so you are not only a son to your father, but you're a son to the community at large that you come from. Yeah.
Well, the community has raised a very fine son in you.
Oh.
We need to talk about your first 25 years that you've written about, and we have to wait for a book. Can we just open up the subject a little now?
It will be my pleasure.
All right. Well,
Yes.
where do we start?
Well, from my childhood.
All right.
My mother, in particular, comes from part of the most impoverished area of Ghana. It's in a very small town that until quite recently I couldn't locate it on the map. And it was called Ekumfi Ebuakwa. It's a very small town, population of no more than maybe 1,000 or so. But my mother's my mother's father came from this region. And he was a great-grandson to an Englishman by the name of Thomas York. So my mother had sisters and cousins who may be of your complexion, or as I would say, the complexion of the inner parts of my palm. And then they go up the way through this extent of the melanin. And fortunately enough for my mother, right at the end of the World War, British nuns from Whitby, the Order of the Holy Paraclete, came to Ghana and established a small British-style girls' boarding school, and they recruited my mother as one of those students. So this lovely native girl did not wear shoes or sandals till she was age 8, until the English nuns gave it to her. But in a period of maybe 3-4 years or so, she accomplished herself very, very much. So the nuns saw fit to identify a sponsor from the United Kingdom by the name of Marjorie Johnson, who too had lost her husband and her entire family during the war years. And she became my mother's sponsor. So my mother completed her education rather well and learned how to speak English and all those things that those nuns taught her. She carried with her only one big advice from her sponsor, and that is not to get pregnant as a teen, but to complete her education and all things will fall in proper place. Well, this philosophy worked very well for my mother, but by the time she got to age 21, 22, which at that time most Ghanaian girls would be married between 18 and 22. So by 24, my mother was being pressed by her parents. When do you get married? And so on and so forth. And of course, my father came from the exact opposite of my mother's background, because his side of the family had over maybe 40 miles square of coconut plantation they've owned for almost 9 generations. And my dad went to Britain to go study law and come back to the country. But the story is told that one day one of my mother's students, a young girl, 16 years old, gets pregnant. And my mother was so furious because this was her promising student. And she had the authority and the audacity to have the police arrest this young man who was responsible for putting the young girl in the family way. And my mother took hold of the keys and threw it in the river on her way home. She was just that incensed by the whole idea, in part because the gentleman was so aloof about his responsibility to the young girl. As the story is told, the family was told that there is a very brilliant lawyer in the city who is not cheap, but he's winning all his cases. Perhaps you guys need to go see that lawyer. He might be able to get your son out of the police cells. That man would be my father. This is how my parents met. Isn't that something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did he win the case for the young man?
Needless to say, I have had the opportunity in the past to tease my dad that he must have had a tongue of embattlement or emotional electricity, because the case did not end up in court and it was settled out, and the boy was released, and needless to say, I'm here. That's quite an awful lot, isn't it? Yeah.
So your mother and father met around this case.
Absolutely.
And became husband and wife.
From a short timetable thereafter.
Okay.
Correct.
And you have siblings.
Yes. My father's first marriage survived 3 children. My older sister, Clara, now just recently retired as a professor of French philosophy. She studied at Cambridge University. I have another brother whom we lost, Lawrence, who studied law at University of London. He incidentally was schoolmate to former late Senator Patrick Moynihan and John F. Kennedy when they were all at London School of Economics together. We have portraits in the family of them as skinny foreign students then. We never knew they would all rise up to prominence at some point in their life. And then another brother who is a lawyer in Ghana, Ernest, and a sister also, Emma, also a lawyer. And I'm here, and I have a sister who is a physician, anesthesiologist at Texas University. And so on. It's a huge family. And
you also have some peers of your father, not peers, but some of your father's peers are quite prominent. Can we speak about some of those people who were at your father's level?
Well, there were many because let's see, the independence of Ghana was in 1957. I was born in 1953, but by 1960 I had actually reached the age of awareness, and I was very much aware of so much of the manifest destiny being shaped for all of us. The question was constantly being asked, who survives us when we're gone? These men said these things very often. Some served in the parliament, others were distinguished ambassadors. My grandmother in particular was first cousins with Madame Nyanaba. Madame Nyanaba is the woman who birthed Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of the country. And in the days when we were young and seeing him at home and all that, and then tragically by 1966 when the coup d'etat took place and the government was overthrown, And so many extended members of the families, and Zimmers in particular, had to go into hiding. Others left the country.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, because those were turbulent days.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there were families who the men left the home in the city, which in any event the home was confiscated.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes assets were expropriated.
Mm-hmm.
And fearing for their lives, some of them just migrated to neighboring African countries where they can find refuge. There were a few who actually found a safe haven on the forested plantations that they had. And these men had food cooked for them only at night, so that no one could see the smoke going into the air. Intelligence officers looked for them. Even today, when you look at what is taking place in Myanmar, where people have suffered tragedies, but food is not being allowed to reach these people. It's a classic textbook example of what happens when military people overthrow a government, because their political ascendancy is born out of insecurity. And therefore there is such enormous paranoia and fear that any presence which is not their own poses an imminent threat that they too are going to be overthrown. And so this is what you had. I recall by the time I was maybe 19, perhaps 1 out of every 1,000 Ghanaian men was on government payroll as an informant. And you have to beg the question, what utility did that serve any of the military regimes? But above and beyond that, what a parasitic way to purge the political economy of the country. And you see so much of this replicated not only in the continent of Africa, but elsewhere in the rest of the world. And so I'm here now, but I have a fair, strong understanding of the political activities militating against the natives of Myanmar because of that.
How did you come to be here?
That's a very fascinating question and a very interesting subject, because I was perhaps in my 3rd year at the University of Ghana in Kumasi, called the University of Science and Technology, but I was in its College of Art. Enjoying university studies, enjoying the classes, my classmates, my colleagues, and extended family and all. And one day, the provost delivers a speech at the Great Hall of the university and states that the university was going to retain the top 5 students from each discipline, so that they would not go home during the summer vacations, but they would stay on the campuses. And so as tourists come to the country, if they need questions answered about the economy, then students, top students in economics will talk to them. If they needed to know something about the culture of the chieftaincy and the monarchy, then students in cultural anthropology, art history, and myself, we would then talk. And students who are in biochemistry would talk about science and development and so on. So this was almost like my first job, so to speak, a tour guide, albeit being on a university campus. I received a group of tourists. I believe there were about 50 of them, and they all came from the Midwest Chicago area. Somebody put this trip together. And a very fine couple by the name of David and Jean Mullins were among them. And I delivered this wonderful lecture. The following day was the day they were supposed to leave out of the country. And I believe the lady traveled to a small town to go buy some ornaments. And Kumasi is a short distance from Obuasi, which is one of the largest gold mining centers in all of Ghana or Africa. And so gold could be purchased at a reasonably cheap price, but on her return she missed the flight going to the United States. And as you know, if you travel by charter flight, if you miss the flight, you've lost your money. And so that's the aviation rules then in those days. So she came back to see me as a tour guide to ask what I can do to help them get to the United States Embassy so they can ask for help, because you know, this was it. And incidentally, at the time, I believe my older brother was vice president for the Ghana Bar Association, and my dad, obviously a retired Supreme Court justice at the time. So they leveraged a little bit of their own social sphere of influence to get them at the embassy, and shortly thereafter they came back to the United States, and a small friendship evolved between our family and their family. And so after a while, our family said, well, you know, someday we would invite the Mullins family to Ghana and give them an actual hospitable Ghanaian visit, as opposed to the tourist visit, staying in the hotel and that sort of thing. Well, that summer I went to the United Kingdom for a small extent, and then came to Chicago to visit. When I returned, about 2 months later, the military overthrew the government, and so they shut the universities down. And as you know, the reason why these military regimes constantly shut the universities is because the universities always happen to be the headquarters of where political agendas can be galvanized and presented as a national agenda outside of the parliament. Why? Because in every university you have students from every single corner of the country, every single tribe. So if university students have a consensus that, oh, we don't like this particular head of state, then they take that and it percolates through their communities in a period of perhaps 30 days, you see. So when the universities were shut, the Mullins family extended an invitation to my family that, please let Sam come over and continue his education here, and that the #1 school of art in the country is here in Chicago, the Art Institute, the school, and it's attached to a museum, and Sam liked the place very much, and when he was here, the faculty who met him were engaged, and so on and so forth. So I presented the proposition to my family. Obviously, all they were afraid of was Al Capone, you know, and he had come and gone. Needless to say, I came and applied to the school of the Art Institute, got admission, and I taught African art history for a semester or so while I was a 4th-year undergraduate student, actually, and then completed that joint major in art and art history. And I owe so much of this to a very respectable, incredibly beautiful and brilliant woman, Rani Hartfield, who was then the dean of students, African-American, lovely lady, and she superintended my admission process after taking an exam to determine my credentials, because the university in Ghana was refusing to release transcripts as part of the orders from the military regime. But they got it almost a year after I had actually graduated. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So after you had finished your education at the Art Institute, so now what are you doing still here? Now you've finished and you can go back to your family.
I probably should, or I could have. I fell in love with this very lovely young lady.
Oh, there was a young lady you met. Well, let's talk about that young lady for a minute.
You've met her.
Of course I've met her, but the viewers haven't, so
yeah.
Let's meet her.
Well, her name is Akainyah, and she's going to probably kill me after I've finished saying this. And she's also a black immigrant too. Her father was a U.S. Army personnel who fought in the battlefields of the Korean War. And it is reported that he either died or he came back, given the fact that he had sealed records regarding the birth of my wife. Her mother was Korean born, and by the time she was age 4 or 5, I believe, the financial needs to raise her and a younger brother had become a little bit cumbersome. So her mother gave her up to the Holt Adoption Agency, which was American enterprise and ran resources, brick and mortar and all, from the United States. And her parents from the United States, David and Jean Mullins, had gone through a second marriage. So Jean and David were going through their second marriage. They had children of their own already. And having not been able to birth children because the lady was beyond the threshold, and the gentleman had fought in the Vietnam War. So the Korean War, actually. And out of sentiment, native goodwill, philanthropy, and humanism, they chose to adopt this lovely young girl from Korea and adopt another girl from Vietnam. So they were the black children who were not being adopted from those agencies. And it was a household full of good energy, intellect, compassion, and just basic good sense. And so I resided with this family even for a while, and then later I resided at St. Sabina Catholic Church up until the time the ban was lifted on political affairs in Ghana, so I could begin to receive funding from home. And then I got an apartment of my own. But yeah, so when I finished and I was starting graduate school and she was in nursing school, I proposed to the family that I would like to be married to their daughter. And we've been married now for 23 years.
Wonderful. See, she accepted your proposal.
I beg your pardon?
The family accepted your proposal.
Yeah.
You have children?
Yes.
Okay.
I have 3 lovely children. The older one, Lorraine, is named in spirit and on paper after my mother. And she is a brilliant student of music and law. She's doing a dual combination, political science, law, and then music. She sings the opera, and she's studying that at the university. And she just came out of Northside College Prep. And then I have a second daughter who is just finishing Whitney Young, and she's interested in medicine, so she's been accepted to go study biochemistry. If you don't mind, in the very turbulent days that we live in, I prefer to keep the privacy of their institutions. If
of
you don't
course.
Yes. And then my son, who is 15 years old, is in boarding school, preparing to go to second year in high school now. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we've gotten you from Ghana. We
Correct.
have you here.
Correct.
We have you married. We have you with children.
Correct.
Now let's get you at Kennedy King.
Correct. Correct.
Where you are a professor of art history and art.
Correct. I am so proud of being on the faculty there. And I'll tell you why. First of all, so much of this effort is owed largely to Chancellor Watson, because about maybe 5 years before then, I was approached by a friend of mine on the distinguished alumni list at the School of the Art Institute at Pashki. You know, Richard Hunt, Georgia O'Keeffe, myself, Leroy Neiman, practically every conceivably respected American artist has some roots with the School of the Art Institute. Well, Ed Pashki found out that I was painting Impressionism, which is one part of my work, but what he didn't know was that this is how I was introduced to art, through nature and landscape by the British nuns in Ghana. And I do that rather effortlessly, and the more intellectually conceived works are the African focus pieces that I have to give visual interpretation to some historical text or cultural anthropology text. In any event, Ed Pashke had been trying to persuade me to join the faculty there at Northwestern. And I had said no, 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 no. And then in the year 2001, I lost my favorite brother to surgery in Columbus, Ohio, when he came to have surgery in the United States. So I had to repatriate his remains back to Ghana for you know, a state burial and that sort of thing. And Gloria was so broken emotionally that no one could console me, because we were like this. He was my father's firstborn by 20 years, but I liked his conservative morality. I loved his understanding of the English language. He was just a human equipment of intellect, just iron and flesh, just bright. And I spent most of my early years in life just sitting and listening to him and his older friends and so on and so forth. So I did not know if I was going to recover ever. And I had lost my father before then, and it was painful, but nothing nearly that close. And one time, I was given this book, and the book was a gift from a friend, and also a letter from a friend of mine, Paula Banks, who asked me to take solace in the fact that the pain will not go away, but with time it will ease. So I was looking forward to when that time will come that it will ease. And I would go to the studio to paint, and I'll end up crying for 4 hours and go home. I would go home and then sit by the piano and play. Sometimes I think I'm composing, and it's all solemn concertos which were filling up my emotions. And one day my friend Chancellor Watson comes by and he says, you know, I know the reason why you are ailing so much, because you write alone, you compose alone, you paint alone, so you are not coming out of your grief, and why don't you come out and come with me? We took a ride and we went to Kennedy King College. I walked into the classroom, and here were students that looked very much like my own nephews and nieces I've left in Ghana. And I think no one needed to convince me any longer that I wanted to teach. So actually, if truth be told, for the first semester or two, I taught the class pro bono without fee, you know. I was just that enchanted. And I would look at the students' faces, and based on my intimate knowledge of the history, the tribal culture, and the traditions, and given the homogeneity of our tribes, I could literally look at some of the students' faces, and I know with the melanin, some have Irish in them, German in them, Jewish in them, whatever ethnic orientation, but I also know that the reddish tone underlining the black skin was American Indian. I could tell nothing about the Caucasian part. I could tell nothing about the American Indian, but oftentimes I'll be able to tell that this African is probably Ashanti or Ga or Ife or Yoruba, or I could tell. And so I found a pleasurable pursuit and a fantastic occupation in that environment. And I tell the students, you should actually stop calling me professor. I'm your uncle and you are my nephews and nieces. And this is the sort of symbiotic relationship we have there on the campus at the moment.
I saw that at your gallery when you presented some of your students to your students' artwork and had them to make their presentations. I could see the affection that was shared between your students and you.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yes.
That's really fantastic. Well, they come in every semester arguing, well, I've never painted before, I've never done this before. I said, well, it's a threshold of the unknown, and we're all going to try this. And the exciting part is that they don't have to sketch, they don't have to draw. They delve with the brush and the pigments and directly on the canvas, and they start painting. And by the end of the semester, you have 2, 3 lovely works of art, and we select the best piece from each student, is corrected, and we mount a wonderful black tie exhibit at the gallery in their honor. And it's something I feel I must do, because when I completed my education at the School of the Art Institute, the first 2 years was an incubation phase of producing these lovely works. And when I finished putting a portfolio together, obviously, I could not find a single gallery that would showcase my work. And from very swollen replies that, well, we sell only established artist works, that is well understood, because why invest your money in incubating a young career when, if indeed the profit indicators are that deal with the established, and allay your cost of production and all those economic models. I understood that. The part that had a heavy soil in my heart was when they said that, well, come back to us a decade or 5 years from now. I had to start from somewhere. And, it was fortune's dilemma, as my dad would best put it. For every door that is closed, it compels you to ask the question, do you stay in the room to suffocate, or you actually dig a hole underneath to escape, or to open a window or open the roof? And so the critical question became, well, you're producing these works, so what is wrong with you in opening up your own gallery? So if
so that's how you came to open your gallery.
It did not come out of any empirically loaded model to determine that, oh, there is a domestic market here, or that the time. It was just out of the urgency and the need to produce this work, but to have a place of integrity, to present it and to match iconographically what a museum would like to see, and be present at that creation and at that invocation, have the clients come and sanction what you're doing. And I believe for most efforts, when every door is closed and people will look at it for not a dilemma, but perhaps a potential bloom of light, if you will. Just as the sun goes down, is darkness, but give it a few hours and the lovely illumination of the moon comes. Who's to say that that is not even more enchanting? And it actually is. And for what its pleasurable pursuit has become, I get to have my work on display 24 hours. I get to use the venue to host diplomatic receptions. I get to have book signing, book readings. On occasion, actually, we've had some matrimonial engagements done. And it has allowed me to have some relative mantle of prominence, if you will, and I have humbly respected that place. And I named it after my father as Akainyah Gallery, not really my name, and it's in memory of my late father. For all his studious and his conscientious effort to underwrite the education of all his children, and to keep the sanctity of the name and the legacy and his estate in its proper accord. It's just the blessing that I think I need to do, and that's it.
How long have you had the gallery?
15 years. We opened in 1993, correct? Although I saw it fit 5 years ago to close it to the general public and to utilize this space to incubate a rather important project. We're just coming back now. We're just opening back to the public. But for 5 years, I needed this space as a writing lab to write this book. We took a huge loss of money, but economists and businessmen will not see the utility in that. But for those of us in this creative arena, we rely on only three things: intuition, instinct, and imagination.
Mm.
And those three things can only be fueled by one thing and one thing only, that is mood. So when a creative individual has a wonderful mood, his instincts, intuition, and imagination are up there.
Mm-hmm.
And when they are attenuated, then there is a complete atrophy in the creative process. So you see Monet goes through the blue period after the death of his wife, and his vision failing. You see Picasso going through that after the divorce from Olga, and so on. And then the rest comes up, you know. And composers went through that. Beethoven, for losing his hearing, the birth of the Fifth Symphony, which he could not hear, and it had to be virtuosity, white and loud, you see. But I needed that time, and that volume is 500 pages, and there is another volume 500 pages. So that's 1,000 sheets.
You have finished both volumes?
Correct, but we're
so which one is, this one is the first volume?
Yes, and this is coming out.
And it'll be published when?
It's coming out August ending, and then we're having the book signing September 3rd at the Art Institute.
Oh, very good.
At the auditorium, and then a reception at the Stock Exchange room as well. And in the process, I also incubated the 7 panels for the creation of the earth, which is based on the book of Genesis. And in November, I traveled to the Vatican to submit 2 copies to be kept, one in memory of Pope John Paul for being the first pope throughout the history of Christendom to apologize for the role of the Catholic Church in slavery. It's not anything private. It was publicly done in Jamaica. And a wonderful speech and a wonderful testament. And then the second one to be kept in memory of my late brother, Sir Lawrence Akainyah, who was knighted by Pope John Paul with the investiture of St. Gregory the Great. He, incidentally, since he studied law and Latin, participated in interpreting the Vatican encyclicals to the African bishops for them to understand and to prepare for what the African contribution to the drafting of the Vatican encyclical for 82 was. So my brother was knighted as a result, so I take 2 volumes to the Vatican and the archives for that. And the third thing I've done is on the 7th day of the creation, as you know, God rests in the Christian Orthodoxy, and in my view, God rests to music. And so there is a 21 minutes long symphony written for 7 instruments to represent the 7 days of the week. And it's 21 minutes long because although the ecclesiastical text attributes God as man, but creation, as we know in life, is born out of a woman. So if I may not go against orthodoxy, then God creates, and the 21-day gestation is what it takes for a woman to begin conception. So the music is 21 minutes long, and it's 7.
This is your composition?
Correct. It's 7 first-string violins, 7 second strings, and then the violas, all 7, 7, 7, 21. 3 trumpets for morning, afternoon, evening, and then the drum, the voice of God, because it's an African visual interpretation of God as man creating the universe. And it's a lovely project.
When will it be presented?
November is the scheduled month. Father Michael Flagger, my pastor, will be leading a delegation of 100 people from Chicago.
There was something recently at St. Sabina honoring you, was there not?
No, not honoring me.
Well,
the church was having a problem with the roof, I believe, and
for some reason I thought you had invited us to come, and I thought there was going to be something having to do with you.
No.
But maybe I misunderstood you.
Yeah, the church had a fundraiser at the
At the
gallery.
gallery, yes, I do know about
Yeah,
that, right.
and we went also to the church, my family and a few friends, for prayers of thanksgiving after I recovered from my surgery just recently.
Then that was what it was,
Yeah,
that you were
correct.
inviting people to come
Correct.
to.
Correct.
Okay.
It's part of our little tribal custom. That
How did you come to be a member of Saint Sabina?
Excellent question. I married there. Father Michael Flecker blessed our marriage. Actually, right before graduate school, I taught English and social studies there as well in the grade school. And the family that welcomed me into the United States, this was their church as well. But the more important part of it was that when the military in Ghana had shut down the universities, shut down the airports and the banks, for a good one academic year, St. Sabina Church paid $250 towards my education here.
Really?
Yes, to allow me as a foreign student to go to school. And have never forgotten that, and I will never forget that. And so St. Sabina has a special place in my heart, far above, beyond what they've done. The symbolism has also deeper and almost ethereal meaning, because my mother's maiden name is Sabina York. My only beloved, closest sister is Sabina. And I would just come into that church and be married into that church. And so I thought it's rather interesting.
Well, I think it was a very good investment for all of those people who helped you to get your footing, to get your education, to find your wife, to get your family. They made a good investment in you, because now here you are being all of these things that I'm saying about you, that you're the Renaissance artist, that you do all of these things and you do them with such a high degree of skill, and with you are the most relaxed person. I have never seen you harried, even when you have a gallery filled with people, and you have your buffet, and your wife is all about trying to be sure that everyone is comfortable and having a nice time. Even so, you take time to acknowledge each one of your guests. You seem to know each person that you invite intimately. There never seems to be a stranger in the group.
Well, I'm flattered and I'm grateful for your acknowledgement about this. I just have a difficulty taking full measure of credit for it, in part because when growing up, you know, and Gloria, education and the individuals who service you in education can, to a very great extent, shape your mindset in a way that can either make you a wonderful civic-minded individual, and if you are responsive to them, so much the better. And sometimes when we don't yield, we suffer the casualties. We were told while growing up in Ghana very often that all humans come into this earth with 30% of the bloodline they've inherited. So whether you like it or not, 30% of you is your father and your mother. Number two, that we become 30% the environment we are placed in. And so we critically have to measure the content of environment where we put our children, where, what school, what playground, what friends they hang around with. My father was notorious of saying that he could not bring any man in his home who was not fit to be called uncle, and that should death claim him prematurely, those uncles should still be able to collaterally exert a moral sphere of influence for his children. And so be careful and be aware of who you bring to your home, lest your son in particular pick up some bad habits And so 30% bloodline, 30% environment, and then the human being has brought only into this world 30% of themselves to harvest A and B, the blood and the environment. That said, there is only a 10% variable. So there are certain individuals who are very willful, then they become 40% that individual, and you have to be careful, because that willful individual, if it's misdirected, you find them in the penitentiary. That willful individual, if you nurture them in the right environment, then you have them as a first executive of a company, or of a country, and so on and so such. And the bloodline is just the guide. Why is that the guide? I knew my dad was a brilliant lawyer and very articulate and very wise. And my mother was just a brilliant woman and a brilliant educator. So growing up, I saw the humility with which men approached my father because he was a Supreme Court justice. But I also saw how women greeted my mother because she was a superintendent of schools. So it did not take but as early as age 11 to come to the realization that I am truly a privileged son, and no mixing of the words, and having accepted that privilege imbued in me 3 burdens of production. Number 1, that I could not do anything foolish to bring dishonor to my father and my mother. That was the first caveat. And the second was that if this is their life because of how hard they've worked, then I should shape a little bit of this heralded pomp for myself, because I too will be married someday and have children. And the third part was about the bloodline. We were taught to be able to look at the intuitive talents and interests that your bloodline have had. And oftentimes the fruit has not fallen too far from the tree. When it happens, it's erosion, floods, rodents take the fruit, animals pick it, human pick.
That's what happens when the fruit falls too far from the tree.
Exactly. The rain goes and streams take it, or or the wind blows a few inches, but otherwise. So I'm impressed by how I see Miss Winfrey, Oprah. She's a brilliant businesswoman, sonorously rhetorical, ambitious, and successful. I'm not surprised because, and she's an educator, so somebody in her bloodline, a grandfather, must have educated people, and then a father owned a shop, and it was not just a barber, he owned the barber shop. Ownership is important. And when you think about it, barbers cut your hair so you can feel good about yourself, and then they're constantly talking and asking questions and talking. So should I really be surprised to know that they have a granddaughter who now talks and makes people feel good about themselves, and she owns this shop called Hapo. And above and beyond that, she's probably the only credible talk show that has constantly kept a psychiatrist on staff and incubated careers for them. The lovely lady, I can't remember her name, she's about your complexion. It's like Robin, I believe, then Dr. Phil and Yanla, and the list goes on. Other talk shows haven't done that. So it's blood, and that's all I've done. Just listen well and learn a lot from ancestry and
nurture other people, and understand that you have the responsibility to bring someone along with you as you rise. And I see you do that with your students. They have great affection for you because of your genuine interest in their development.
Well, as you know, it is said that any mantle of prominence is a lonely place. Any mantle. And you must, by volition or other, take others with you. Sometimes very few, but sometimes a lot. Depends on the gravity of your climb. just that the mantle of prominence could be a lonely place, and it's not out of individuals' selective choice to be that way, but it could be. How do people perceive you? Creative people have to go into not a sabbatical, but into seclusion, to tap into the ideas of intuition, instinct, and imagination to create. So we may hear Michael Jackson may go elsewhere, and then 4 years later the lovely Thriller album is out, and then 2 years later then there is Bad, and you know, Quincy Jones has done that, and other people, and those things, you know, Mariah Carey and so on. It's required. And how do you explain that to the general public? Imagine a pilot flying to Budapest or Amsterdam under imagination, intuition, and instinct. He has to fly the plane with his training. The surgeon cannot operate with instinct, intuition, and imagination. But all composers and writers and painters, this is what the fuel for that creative engine is just that. And you must have a relationship with other creative beings who are operating at that level, be they writers or journalists or you know, and this is why I respect and enjoy my friends who are anchors and reporters and so on, because of what they do. It's not just reading, writing, and editing, and the content and patron and viewer engagement. It's all creativity. The writers who are friends, the composers who are friends, and the poets and the instructors and lecturers, professors, and so on.
They keep flashing little signs. I don't want to interrupt you. I really could sit here and just go on, and I'll have the pleasure of your company in some other on some other occasions. And I'm glad to know this isn't our last conversation, but it's been the longest sustained conversation I've had with you.
I'm delighted.
And I'm very happy to have you as my nephew. I love to be your aunt, and I feel so honored to have found myself to be a Ghanaian and to actually join the family that I didn't know I had.
Well, you're welcome, and the rest of the extended family are looking forward to meeting you as well.
Well, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
My guest has been Samuel Akainyah, composer, artist, teacher, writer, Renaissance artist. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you very much.